we'll be looking at anything like mandatory vaccination because this has just become such a hot political issue.
Some employers like hospitals and schools could eventually require vaccines. A Spokane tribal member is now on the job helping Washington State with cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous people. Doug Nadvornik of Spokane Public Radio has more.
Don Pullen's job with the State Patrol was created by the legislature after members heard stories about Native American women who were either murdered or missing. Pullen will serve as a bridge between investigating agencies and Native tribes in eastern Washington. She says she has first-hand experience in cases like this. Her mother was murdered when she was 20.
I remember at that age communicating with law enforcement, Bureau of Indian Affairs. People were always communicating to me that whole process, where the individual who did the crime was, so I'm familiar with that whole process.
Pullen joins Patty Gooch, who until this week has been the State Patrol's tribal liaison for the entire state. Gooch says Native Americans and Alaska Natives comprise nearly 2% of Washington's population, but 5% of the people reported missing.
Some of the people that are on our list have been missing since 1971. Part of the things I've done for the past year is go through that list one at a time and try and find if we actually have found people.
Gooch says the liaisons also field calls from people out of state who are looking for loved ones, but they say they never knew whom to call in Washington to report someone missing. I'm Doug Nadvornik reporting.
This is KUOW News.
Hello and welcome to News Hours, coming to you live from the BBC World Service Studios in central London. I'm Tim Franks. In one sense, Washington, indeed the world, has moved on. It's preparing for Joe Biden to be inaugurated in January as the next president of the United States. But still, noisily, and in one election official's mind, dangerously, the current president continues not to accept that outcome. Overnight, Donald Trump posted a little video where he continued to make unsubstantiated claims about the voting fraud which robbed him of a second term. Today, he's been deluging Twitter with posts about Georgia, which he still insists he won easily, despite it being a state which, after a recount, election officials confirmed that he had lost. So much will be so familiar to you. What's changed this week is with that election official I mentioned. He's Gabriel Sterling. He's the voting systems manager for the Secretary of State in Georgia. He's a Republican. And on Tuesday, his voice shaking with anger, he made this appeal on the steps of the state capitol.
Mr. President, it looks like you likely lost the state of Georgia. We're investigating. There's always a possibility. I get it. You have the rights to go through the courts. What you don't have the ability to do, and you need to step up and say this, is stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get shot. Someone's going to get killed.
Just before we came on air, and with the backdrop of the president still tweeting furiously about Georgia, Gabriel Sterling spoke to me.
Well, what happened was early Tuesday afternoon, and I got a call from our voting system vendor, project manager, who was clearly very upset. We had heard something about a viral video claiming data manipulation, and the young man who was recorded was a tech. He was a temporary technician hired to help out with the election. He was doing a simple task. He was basically taking a jump drive from an election management computer over to another computer so he could read a report. And there were two conspiracy theorists who were videotaping him, providing commentary over something they didn't understand, saying he's manipulating voter information and outcomes, and he was committing treason, stuff like that. They put that out. They tracked his name down. They put his name out, and within hours, he's got a unique name. So his family started getting harassed, and then somebody posted a tweet saying the kid's name. It says, "You have committed treason. May God have mercy on your soul," with a gif of a slowly swinging noose. And at that point, I was pretty much done.
And at that point, you made this appeal for the political leaders in the country who have not condemned these incitements to violence, and you called on the president, you called on senior members of the Republican Party to condemn in terms these incitements. And it hasn't been limited to this young man. Since that happened, the president retweeted a sort of an excerpt of your appeal, but he carried on saying at the same time, this has been a rigged election. What did you make of his response?
That it was vintage President Trump. He just doubled down on where he was. And basically said, I'm not listening to you or any of this stuff. I'm going to go the path that I've chosen to go. And then he tripled down on it, I guess you'd say, the next day when he released a 46-minute video of basically conspiracy theories, debunked myths, stuff out of the internet that's just all misinformation, disinformation, and willfully put it together in what he said was the most important speech of his career, which was, again, baffling to a degree, because nearly everything he said has already been proven wrong, like, statistically, factually, data-wise, everything. And I'm just at a loss to understand why he keeps on. There is no path. All he's doing at this point is undermining people's belief in the system in 2020. It's the same way in my state of Georgia. The losing gubernatorial candidate, Stacey Abrams, did the same thing, but on the other side of the spectrum. So the two sides of the same coin. We have to get to a point in this country where everybody, regardless of party and regardless of outcome, believes, yes, this was a free and fair election. And on this particular one, 2020, this was the freest, fairest, and most secure election in the history of the United States.
But you still have, you have the president saying what he's saying. You've got the two Republican senators in Georgia who are facing this runoff election in the beginning of January saying, their spokespeople saying, we won't apologize for addressing the obvious issues of the way our state conducts its elections. We won't apologize for criticizing, in their words, inaction and lack of accountability. There seems to be a whole gamut of senior figures who are saying that you've got it wrong. You're saying this election was rigorous and fair, and they're saying, no, it wasn't, and it's because you're not looking hard enough.
Yeah, and the president fires the person who was in charge of making sure it was secure because he said it was fair and secure.
Did you vote for the president?
I love that question. You're the first one who actually asked me it. I did.
And how do you feel about that now?
Given the choices at the time, you take the information you have and make your decision as a vexed human being.
Well, but at the time, he'd already spent several weeks, if not months, saying this is going to be a rigged election. He was preparing the ground for this, wasn't he?
You're right, he was, and I was about it then. But, Tim, I've been a Republican conservative here since I was 15 years old. I'm 50 now. I'm not going to walk away from my party. I'm going to fight for the sanity and sanctity of it. And there are important issues that are always going to be at the core of that. And we have an imperfect system here. It's the system that we got. And again, it's extra frustrating now, especially given the situation around the continuing, you'd hope the sanity would kick in at some point, but obviously it's not.
But you've also, clearly you've got another very important election coming up in Georgia, which you will be involved in running, and you as a Republican official, I presume you will be tempted, or you're certain that you will be voting for the Republican candidates?
I'll be voting for Republican candidates, and there's an irony going on right now in this state where Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell had a rally here yesterday encouraging people to not vote.
Yeah, no, I saw that. The reason, it's interesting, and I hear what you're saying, that, look, you're a sort of deep tissue Republican, conservative, and there are profound ideological reasons why you feel that way. But politics is also about character. It is about leadership, as you have pointed out. And I just wonder if, for example, with Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, if they are not willing to say, I agree with Gabriel Sterling that actually these allegations are entirely baseless, and actually I do have faith in the way our democracy is carried out, why does that not count more for you?
I think if they did take that route, they would get more votes and not less, because the calculus is happening right now. And
yeah, but you're saying that you're going to vote for them anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Their underlying issue right now is they believe that they don't have the rabid Trump base, that they will definitely lose their election. And they took that calculus into account. Essentially, the president said, you're going to ask to fire Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, or I'm going to go do 2 tweets and torpedo your campaigns. And in this particular instance right now, we're in a situation where the outcome of these races decides who controls the United States Senate. Listen, Tim, this is what the really bad point is. My title is Voting System Implementation Manager for Georgia. I'm a functionary. It shouldn't even be me you're talking to, and it's amazing to me that it is me at this point.
But that tells you something, doesn't it? I mean, that's the point.
It absolutely does. And maybe, hopefully, this will set a fire and I can go back to being just a regular guy again and not... That's the frustrating part about this. I shouldn't be the person who's on the news talking about this. I'd really rather it would be some other elected Republicans, but they're all, unfortunately, in a position where their own constituents, and I was in a hearing today where people said, well, my constituents say this, and I'm thinking, yes, you represent people, but I'm sort of a Burkean, if you want to get back to the end of this thing. People get elected for their judgment and their character and their knowledge and the policies. I get it. And being involved in this is complex. And for some people, the calculus would go one way. For me, it goes another. But it doesn't take away the fact that I would prefer people step up and do the right thing at all times, regardless of the consequences. That's how I always did it when I was in office. And that's why I think people who are in office, regardless of party, should act. But there are times when you have tough calculus in a situation that overrides the short-term view on those.
And given that you are a Republican who has kindly come to the plate on this one, may I ask you this? What you think of the prospect of a Trump candidacy in 2024?
If I was a betting person?
No, as a Republican. I mean, whether you think it would be wise or desirable.
Oh, I think he will do it. I think it'd be disastrous.
Gabriel Sterling speaking to me from Georgia. President Trump is due to arrive in the state in 2 days' time to campaign for the Republicans competing in those two Senate runoff races. Gary O'Donoghue is our correspondent in Washington. How's Mr. Trump's appearance likely to play?
It's amazing. You could hear, couldn't you, in his voice, the sheer stress that Republicans in Georgia are under in this position they've been put in, those that are in charge. And I think they know that in terms of the Senate races, what the president says on Saturday in the state itself is going to be absolutely crucial, because there is this incredible dilemma, dichotomy, paradox at the centre of the position, which is how can you call into question so radically the electoral system there and at the same time urge people to vote for two senators?
And given that, I mean, is there a best guess as to whether it's likely to fire up his base, or actually it's almost as don't get out the vote campaign?
Well, we've heard some Republicans in the state suggesting that people shouldn't participate. Already we've heard that. We heard the chair of the RNC, she was down there, Ronald McDaniel was down there the other day, and she was asked directly, why should we bother voting? It's already decided, isn't it, by the corrupt, rigged system here. So they've got a huge logistical... And, this isn't just this or that runoff. We've got to bear in mind that as things stand, the United States Senate is at 50-48 in favour of the Republicans, these two outstanding seats. If it goes 50-50, and I think that's a long shot, I think it's a long shot the Democrats will win those two seats, but if it does, then Joe Biden's prospects for getting stuff done are transformed.
Away from that, there is the rather large issue of the coronavirus. Anthony Fauci, the top infectious disease specialist, is meeting Joe Biden's team today. Tell us about the controversial remarks that he made on his way into that meeting.
He's absolutely thrown a sort of hand grenade into the midst of the debate in the UK in particular, because he was asked whether or not the Brits, as it was put, why did they get to sort of authorising the Pfizer vaccine quicker than the US? And he said that Britain had rushed it. Britain had joined the marathon in the last mile, that it was inappropriate. And of course, he's not just the face of sort of the scientific battle against COVID here. He's a worldwide figure, and that has caused enormous consequences in Britain, with the regulator there having to defend its position.
Gary O'Donoghue, and just within the last couple of minutes, Dr. Fauci has said, I don't mean to imply any sloppiness on the part of the UK regulators. Coming up on the programme, we'll have a little bit of Dr. Fauci clarifying his remarks. It was in an interview with the BBC. Also, we'll be hearing from the Indian farmers who say that their protests against the government will last as long as it takes.
I assure you that we will die but not let our lands be taken. We don't care about winter. Our elders are strong and we have enough ration and medical supplies to support us in this crisis.
That report from Delhi coming up in 15 minutes. One other headline from the BBC Newsroom. Facebook says it will now remove from its site fake claims and conspiracy theories about coronavirus vaccines.